On this edition of Independent Sources, in search of the Black Russians, the little-known story of the African Americans who sought refuge from oppression in Russia.
This is about ideals and the idealists and those people who believed really in a better life, and that's why they went.
Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Gary Pierre. The story of Russian defectors seeking solace in the United States is so well known that it's even been portrayed in film. On the other hand, there hasn't been much coverage of the reverse migration that took place. Back in the 1930s, several African Americans sought refuge in Russia as a means of escaping lynchings and a Jim Crow system of segregation. Zafis Lebrun sat down with Yelena Demikovsky to talk about her efforts to document the lives of these people and some of their descendants.
Yelena, thank you so very much for being with us in studio today.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so before we get started with our conversation, I wanted us to take a look at a clip that you provided us of some of the work you've been doing on this film, Black Russians.
Long live our Soviet motherland, built by the people's mighty hand. Long live.
This film is about dreams and dreamers, those who believed they and their families deserved a life better than lynching and segregation.
Long may our crimson flag inspire.
Выходила, песню заводила, про степного сизого орла, про того, которого любил.
The film brings the history up to date. The descendants reveal how these events have shaped their lives, how they were affected by the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union and rising nationalism, and how this compares to the dreams of their parents and grandparents. We have three main characters. Mary Louise Patterson.
My parents had me after they'd had a number of adventures, one of which was they both separately went to the Soviet Union.
Yelena Hunger.
Мои бабушка и дедушка приехали в 1928 году из Америки, из Нью-Йорка в Советский Союз. Они бежали от расизма.
And Wayland Rod.
Мой отец ехал сюда из Америки за своей мечтой, и он реализовал свою мечту. Он стал здесь достаточно известным, снимался в фильмах.
So, Yelena, the first question, of course, that everybody seems to be asking when I told them about this is, why Russia? Why was Russia a place for these folks in the 1930s?
At that time, in 1920s and 30s, the country was really changing, and everybody hoped it was changing for the best. So after the Russian Revolution, the country was really building. So there was a new country where they announced equality for everybody, and they also announced that everybody could have a jobs, which actually happened. So at this point, this guys, a lot of people were coming to Russia, including a lot of white from all over the world, including white Americans. But of course, we all know that what was happening in America for black people at that time, which was segregation and racism and lynching. And at that time, those particular people who went to Soviet Union, they actually had nothing to lose. They were all educated people, and they had their dreams. They had their ideals. They wanted to go there just because they heard about this new country, and everybody was wondering what was actually happening. Not essentially they were all communists or anything. They were all different, all kinds of people, like, artists, engineers, and just a couple of them were communists. And studying communism, in fact.
So you talked about the 20s and the 30s, and then what happened after that? Was it a kind of a continuous sort of a glorious age for the African Americans and the other blacks who went to Russia, or did they kind of start having to deal with their own kinds of segregation in Russia at the time? Did it get tough for them?
Well, that wasn't that tough for them, not as tough as for the Russians. And what actually happened, they did get jobs, and some people who were going back and forth studying communism, and their mission was going back to America and actually spreading communism among Americans. Those particular people who stayed, either they had white wives coming, they brought from here, or they married Russian women, so they already had their families. And the times were changing, yes, because if we take every year in 1930s, every year was different. It was still 1932, there was still a year of hope at that time, where American group, then first American, well, it's not the first American group, but it's like one big American group came making a film. It's called Black and White, and Langston Hughes, great American poet, was among them. The film never happened. In fact, Langston Hughes didn't like the idea of too much propaganda at that time. And, but at that time they were coming, and the times were changing. And even in 1936, they still did an incredible Hollywood-type movie, very much propaganda movie. But then they did, maybe nowhere in the world it could happen, and it never happened. They put a little boy, he was maybe like 4 years old, a little black boy, Jimmy, in 1936. And that boy was part of the film, embraced by the white people.
Right, he was the son of a white Russian woman, right? Was that
he was the son of a white Russian woman, and in the film as well, and also in real life. And much later, only here, I found out that that boy actually was a son also of an American father. So 1936 is one thing, 1937 is, that's when purges came. And that's when everything started changing. And that's when Stalin said, you guys, either you stay here and denounce your American citizenship, or go back. So a lot of them, people pretty much lost what to do, because a lot of them had their families, including whites and black. So anyway, some of them stayed, and they still had their jobs, and they were working for the Soviet Union, but they did see the changes.
Right.
And they did see that their friends, Russian friends, they made already Russian friends, they were disappearing. So they had a lot of disappointment as well.
Wow. So what about their children? You talked about, the 30s and stuff when things changed. Were their children able to have successful lives?
Actually, yes. Their children are pretty successful. They still made it there. They still had great education. And our main characters, as we already just saw, my main characters will be two black Russians living in Russia, and both of them very successful. And one is especially successful, Yelena Demikovsky, who is a huge TV personality in Russia, and people know her. And,
Does she talk about any kind of segregation that she may have faced while in her, in her growth?
She felt like she was different. But at that time, she was so exotic, and they loved her. In fact, they wanted to touch her hair. She never felt that segregation at all, in fact.
She did feel the other, but not in a negative way.
Not in a negative. I actually very much loved way. And in fact, they would say, sometimes they would say, you're so tan when we have to go tanning, and how lucky you are.
So why was it that you wanted to make this film, Yelena?
The film is about really, it's connected with today life, because this is about ideals and the idealists and those people who believed really in a better life.
So tell me about when are you hoping that you could have this film out, available for distribution and so forth?
So now we are in fundraising. We are looking for money to finish this film, and it's pretty much, what we need is to edit and give it to the distributor, so the distributor could cover the cost of the archives. We will have archival footage, and of course archival, photo, pictures, stills, and everything. So, but that's our hope, that when we finish, when our editing, we will give it to the distributors and let them see that.
All right. Well, Yelena, best of luck to you. Thank you so much for coming in, and I definitely look forward to seeing the film in its entirety when it's completed.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me again. Thanks.